if you can turn to page 13 in your booklet, what we're going to talk about today, oh, and it's not going to let me write on here, which is unfortunate, okay, is sexual reproduction. Oh, it did show up. This was really slow. So we're going to talk, the outcomes in your curriculum are about illustrating and explaining the production of male and female gametes. So gametes is the fancy science word for sex cells. So we're talking about the sperm and the egg. And we're making these cells by the process of meiosis, which is what we're going to cover in this lesson. We're going to compare and contrast the function of mitosis to meiosis. So that's going to be part of your online learning for tomorrow, is comparing and contrasting mitosis and meiosis in terms of the mechanism, what cells use it, how many cells are produced, whether they're identical or different, and how many chromosomes each of those cells have. We're going to eventually go in and compare sexual and asexual reproduction in terms of their advantages and disadvantages. And we talked about asexual reproduction last class a little bit, right? We highlighted the gist of it. And we talked about some advantages and disadvantages of asexual reproduction. So it's fast, it's easy, there's no need to spend energy finding a mate, and all the offspring are identical. And that can be an advantage and a disadvantage, right? It's an advantage if the environmental conditions are really, really favorable. You get to make a lot of offspring in a really short amount of time. Being identical is a disadvantage if the environment changes. When you're identical, if that environment becomes unfavorable, everyone's wiped out, right? So usually an advantage of sexual reproduction is that variation that it produces, right? So usually if the environment changes, some of the offspring can survive because some of them are, you know, okay to survive in that environment. We're going to look at adaptations of plant and animal species that enhance reproductive success. We've talked a little bit about that peacock and his big feathers, right? We're going to describe the structure and function of the male and female reproductive system, and then we're going to outline conception to birth in humans as well. So when we look at sexual reproduction, this is going to involve two sexes. Okay? So in most organisms, so males and females. And it results in offspring that are going to be genetically different from parents. So if I was a highlighter, I might kind of highlight that piece. I can't highlight in PowerPoint, so I'm just underlining them. So females make eggs. It combines with the sperm from a male, and it produces a single-celled organism, a single cell called a zygote, and that's going to develop into a new organism. Fertilization happens in the fallopian tubes in humans. Okay, so we're going to talk about how, so today's lesson we'll talk about how that sperm and egg are made, and then going forward we'll talk about male anatomy, female anatomy, and then again we'll outline from conception to birth, human reproduction. Okay? So once that cell is formed, that zygote, so once the egg and the sperm unite, that cell is formed, then that single cell now has all the genetic information. It's going to divide by mitosis to make an offspring. Okay? And that offspring is not going to be genetically identical to the parent. It's not going to be genetically identical to any siblings. So it's going to have variation. So in order for this process to occur, we need these cells to undergo meiosis. Okay, so meiosis makes or creates the egg and the sperm. So the other day I said all your body cells go through mitosis with the exception of the egg and sperm. Meiosis is making the egg and sperm. And the whole reason we have to do meiosis is to reduce the number of chromosomes by half. Okay? Because we talked last day about how many chromosomes humans have. How many individual chromosomes do we have? We have 23 pairs, so we have 46. So if we didn't undergo meiosis, when we made the sperm and the egg, yeah, well, there's my mathematician, right? This would make an offspring with 92. Well, we kind of maybe already have an idea that sometimes if we have too many chromosomes or not enough, it doesn't produce what we call a viable organism, right? So this can't happen. How would it be too many chromosomes? And that organism would just be miscarried. Okay, that wouldn't survive. So we need a process to reduce those number of chromosomes by half. So what happens is these cells undergo meiosis, and that halves the number of chromosomes. So then halves it to 23. So we get 23 in the sperm, 23 in the egg, and at fertilization that results in a new individual with 46 chromosomes. Does that make sense? So this is the whole reason. We reduce it by half, so when the egg and the sperm unite, the organism has a full set of 46 chromosomes. That it wouldn't survive. It wouldn't be viable. Most of the time when the chromosomes don't separate properly and the egg and the sperm have too many or too few chromosomes, because it happens, most of the time that offspring would just be miscarried fairly early in the pregnancy. There are a few chromosomes that we can have extras of or not enough of and still survive. So Down syndrome is trisomy 21. So tri means 3. So it means we have 3 copies of chromosome number 21. Sometimes in our sex chromosomes, the X and the Y, what makes us male or female, we can have just one X chromosome and still survive. We can have XXY, it's called Klinefelter syndrome, and still survive. But there's very few that we can survive with. We talk about that more in Biology 12 if you're really, really interested in those kind of genetic disorders. So meiosis happens in the gonads, and that's kind of a funny word, but gonad is just a general term for the sex organs. Okay, so in females, the main sex organ is the ovaries, and in males, it's the testes. So rather than saying ovaries in females, testes in males, we can just say gonads, and it's a little bit kind of more succinct, okay? But that's what it means. So meiosis is really important because it takes that diploid parent, and diploid meant 2N, right? And that meant 2 copies of the chromosomes. So N basically means the number of chromosomes. So it takes that diploid cell and reduces the number of chromosomes to half, by half. Okay, so that means the egg and the sperm only contain half the amount of genetic information that an organism requires. Okay, so we have our diploid parent cell. It's got 2 copies of the chromosome. It undergoes meiosis in the gonads again. If it's female, it's the ovaries. If it's males, it's the testes. And it produces non-identical haploid gametes. And a haploid meant 1 copy of the chromosomes. So in humans, the parent cell has 46 chromosomes, and those gametes would have 23 chromosomes. So the whole point, the number of chromosomes is reduced by half. Have I said this like 4 times already and we're on slide 2? Yes, so that's an important thing. Okay. It also allows for a bit of variation in the species, and that Amoeba Sisters video, when you watch it, we'll talk about how that variation happens. There's a couple of different ways. And it'll talk about some of those things that happen when the chromosomes don't split properly. That's just kind of back of your brain knowledge. Again, leading into grade 12, we're not going to cover a ton of that here. So meiosis allows for variation in the species, okay? And it can happen because those chromosomes aren't divided up all the same. You don't, when we undergo meiosis, it's not all your dad's chromosomes line up on one side and your mom's line up on the other like a grade 7 dance and then split evenly. You get a random mix going into each gamete of chromosomes that came from your mother or father, but it can also exchange genetic material when they line up in metaphase. It can swap, and I'll talk about that a little bit. It's called crossing over. Okay? So this is going to create different characteristics in the offspring. So it's unlike mitosis that created identical offspring or just clones of the parent cell, we're going to get that variation. So we talked about haploid and diploid. Haploid having a single set of chromosomes. Humans, our haploid number is 23. Diploid is 2 sets of chromosomes. Our diploid number is 46. Homologous pairs is a little bit of a new concept. Homo, that prefix means the same. Okay? So this refers to matching pairs of chromosomes. So you got 23 chromosomes from your mother. So let's just do those in red. And I'm just going to do dot, dot, dot rather than draw numbers 1 to 23. So you got chromosome 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. You got one set of those chromosomes 1 to 23 from your mother. You got a set of chromosome 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way down to 23 from your father as well. So you have 2 copies, we all have 2 copies of chromosome 1. They code for the same information. So that if they have the genes for hair color and eye color and second toe longer than the first toe and hairy knuckles, okay, each of those chromosomes has those genes, those coding regions. Are they identical? No, maybe your dad has blonde hair and blue eyes. So that chromosome has the blonde hair, blue-eyed traits on it. And this one might have brown hair and brown eyes from your mother. Does it still code for eye color and hair color and all those other things? Yes, but are they exactly the same? No, because they have those different versions, those different traits on them. Does that make sense to people? So again, chromosome 2 is the same, chromosome 3 is the same. These here are called homologous pairs. They code for the same things, but they're not identical. Okay? So sometimes when they line up, they can swap information between the two of them, and we'll talk about that. And that's called crossing over. That's just, we're going to mention it briefly. I'm not going to test you on it. And then that goes to grade 12 biology. But just a little bit of kind of keep in the back of your brain. Again, gametes are those sex cells, specialized cells for reproduction, so egg or sperm cells. And the zygote is that fertilized egg. When the sperm fertilizes the egg, it's that single cell that results from that. So the basic process of meiosis, and this is happening in the male and female, or the mother and the father. We take that diploid cell, okay, we make a copy of it, just like we did in mitosis. We make a photocopy of it. And then, in meiosis 1, we're going to split apart those chromosomes 1, those chromosomes 2, we're going to split them apart. So you're only, rather than having 2 copies of chromosome 1 and 2 copies of chromosome 2, you're just going to have 1 copy of each of those. Does that make sense? And those are going to be a random mix of the chromosomes that came from your mother and father. But you're going to have 1 copy of 1, 1 copy of 2, 1 copy of chromosome 3, 1 copy of chromosome 4, 1 copy of chromosome 5, all the way down to chromosome 23. And then in meiosis 2, remember how we had those sister chromatids? We're going to split those sister chromatids up. That's going to result in sperm being made, okay, and eggs being made. And then at fertilization, that sperm's going to fertilize that egg. So you're going to get that 1N plus 1N. You're going to get 1 set of chromosomes from the sperm, 1 complete set from the egg. When they combine, you get that zygote, that fertilized egg cell that has all the genetic information. So this meiosis 1 takes that diploid parent cell with 2 copies of the chromosome. It duplicates the set, it makes a photocopy. Again, it's no smarter, but then it divides up those homologous chromosomes. It divides up chromosome 1 to one cell, chromosome 1 to the other cell. You get a chromosome 2, you get a chromosome 2. You get a 3, you get a 3. So this is often referred to as reduction division because meiosis 1 is where the number of chromosomes is reduced. Mitosis 2 is called mitotic separation. So it's, again, where those sister chromatids, where those photocopies get split up and divided into the offspring cells. Okay? So again, gametes, or the egg and the sperm, are produced by meiosis. So in mitosis, we said all the body cells did this with the exception of the egg and the sperm. So meiosis is just done by either the egg, if you're female, or the sperm if you're male. And the entire point is to reduce that number of chromosomes by half. Okay, so when fertilization happens and the sperm and the egg unite, the offspring has a full set. The process of meiosis is essentially the same as mitosis. we're going to go through those steps, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, and then cytokinesis, but we're going to go through them twice. Does that make sense? Okay. So interphase, this isn't technically part of meiosis, just like it wasn't technically part of mitosis. Interphase comes before meiosis. The chromosomes haven't condensed. You see a diagram. But what's going to happen in interphase is the chromosomes are going to duplicate, right? They're going to make a photocopy of themselves. So those single-stranded chromosomes are going to make a photocopy of themselves and become double-stranded. Then we're going to go through those stages of prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase once. So this is called meiosis 1. Okay? So it's a little bit different, and I'm going to highlight the differences. So here are the chromosomes still condensing and the cell membrane breaking down and the centrioles and spindle forming in prophase? Yes. In metaphase, are they still lining up in the middle? In anaphase, are they still being pulled apart? Telophase, are we still pinching in and reforming the nucleus? Absolutely. I am not going to spend a ton of time on those steps. I'm going to spend more time highlighting where it's different from mitosis. Does that make sense to everyone? So we need to put that 1, 2, 3, or 4. Or sorry, no. Just sorry. We need to indicate whether it's prophase 1 or prophase 2. So you're going to indicate that with a Roman numeral after this. Okay? So in prophase 1, our chromosomes are condensing. But in meiosis, unlike mitosis, they're going to buddy up. They're going to find their other chromosome 1, and they're going to buddy up with each other. So in, kindergarten, you had buddies to walk to the gym with, right? We're going to have buddies here. By the time you're in grade 7, you were trusted to walk single file, right? But we're buddying up. So the homologous chromosomes are going to pair with one another. So chromosome, 1s are going to pair up. Chromosome 2s are going to pair up. Chromosome 3s are going to pair up. They're all going to pair up. Then metaphase, those pairs are going to line up in the center, in the middle. Metaphase still means middle. So rather than being single file down the middle of the cell, we're going to be buddied up. Does that make sense? So this is kind of a clue, if they're buddied up, that it's meiosis versus mitosis. Anaphase, here, we're going to separate those homologous chromosomes. No, that's not how you spell it. Chromosomes. Okay, we're going to separate those homologous chromosomes. Okay, so here, a chromosome. So this is chromosome 1 going to this side. This is chromosome 1 going to that side. Chromosome 2 is going to this side. Chromosome 2 is going to this side. Does that make sense to everyone? We're splitting up those buddies. Now here, I usually use like blue for boys and red for girls when I draw it, just because I apparently stereotype. Sorry about that. But here it's showing all the male chromosomes lined up on one side, or all the blue ones and all the red ones on the other. Would that happen in reality? No, in reality it's kind of a scramble, right? Just find your buddy and line up. So sometimes you might have, not all the male, not all the ones that came from your mother or father on one side or the other. Okay? So, and again, this is only showing 2 for ease. This is happening with the 23 pairs of chromosomes. Okay, and then telophase and cytokinesis, we're going to see that pinching in. Okay, but now when it divides in 2, does this cell have the information from the red chromosomes? No, it might be lacking that blue eye or blonde hair genes. Does this one have the blue chromosome cells? No, it doesn't. So now it only has half the number of chromosomes, or half that genetic information. Okay, so the cell begins to divide into 2 daughter cells. It's important to understand that each daughter cell can get any combination of those maternal, means from your mother, or paternal, from your father, chromosomes. Okay, there's no interphase, so there's no growth, and the cell doesn't do its job between meiosis 1 and 2. At the end of meiosis 1, we end up with those 2 cells with half the number of chromosomes. In meiosis 2, this is like mitosis. Okay, We start with 2 cells though. So meiosis 2 will always have 2 cells. So those 2 cells that were made at the end of meiosis 1, each of those cells are going to undergo this as well. Okay, so the cells divided into 2 daughter cells. In prophase, you're going to see again the chromosomes condensing, the nucleus breaking down. In metaphase 2, they're lined up in the middle. Okay, so again, metaphase is still going to be middle. Anaphase is still going to be that moving away. In this case, it's those sister chromatids separating. Those photocopies are being divided up. So this is why it's called mitotic separation. Separating up those photocopies. And then in telophase and cytokinesis, again, there's pinching in and splitting into 2, but this is happening in 2 cells. So you're going to end up with 4 cells, each with half the number of chromosomes. And it says somatic cells. So soma is a fancy word for body. So half the information from your body cells. Do you get the idea of that kind of? So mitosis took 1 cell that's diploid or has 2 copies of the genetic information and made 2 identical diploid cells. Meiosis takes 1 diploid cell and makes 4 haploid cells. Okay? It is a little more complicated than this. Okay? The end result is 4 gametes, egg or sperm. In the egg, it actually only makes 1. There are 4 cells that result, but only 1 of those will become an egg. And you can learn more about that in grade 12 biology, but I'll just mention it. With half the number of chromosomes. Once meiosis happens, those gametes, those egg and the sperm are formed. The next step in development is fertilization, that joining of the egg and the sperm, and we'll talk about how that happens in a day or 2. Okay, so this is just kind of an overview of meiosis. Okay, this is just showing one of those homologous sets of chromosomes. They replicate in preparation for division. Okay, and when they line up, they can cross over and exchange pieces of information. So maybe the red one had the blue-eyed gene, and the blue one had the brown-eyed gene, and they just swap those. It's just another way to get variation. No genetic information has been lost. It's just recombined. Okay, then this one, we split it up in meiosis 1. We end up with 2 cells that have half the genetic information, right? Because this red chromosome here is missing most of the blue information, and this blue chromosome is missing most of the red information. Okay, and then we separate those sister chromatids, and we end up with 4 cells at the end, each with half the genetic information. And some of those can have a new combination of that genetic information. So again, what comes after this? In humans, 1 egg and 1 sperm combine through the process of fertilization in the fallopian tube in females to form a zygote or fertilized egg. And this has all the genetic information, half from the egg and half from the sperm. Okay, so basically, egg cells are really large because they contain all the organelles. So the Golgi, the mitochondria, all the organelles, and 1 set of chromosomes. The egg cell is actually the only human cell you can see with the naked eye. It's so big. The sperm will fertilize the egg, okay, and it basically just dumps its genetic information into the egg. No other information comes from the sperm other than that genetic information, which is super important. Okay, but all the organelles come from the mother's side. Okay, so at fertilization, the haploid gamete from the male, that's the sperm, combines with that haploid gamete from the female and creates that diploid zygote, 2 copies of the chromosome. Does that kind of make sense? And that's what we're going to talk about next. All right, so I've got a couple of videos to show you here.